Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jolyn Drennan, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the podcast, Oyster River School psychologist Felicia Sperry joins us to talk returning to the classroom and how social and emotional learning can help children build resilience. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed. Because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like this show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm incredibly excited because today on the show, I welcome Felicia Sperry, school psychologist at Oyster River School District, who I'm hoping can help me understand what's in store for me and my family when my son returns to school. So Felicia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So this might sound like the setup for a joke, but I promise it's not. Where do school psychologists go during the summer?
Well, some of us do actually stay in school and do some work at school and catch up and do some PD. But a lot of our school psychs, especially in New Hampshire, get to the beaches and to the mountains and to the rivers and do take some time to reset and enjoy ourselves so we can get back to the work comes August and September.
Actually, this might be a joke now. So when school psychologists flee, do they flee in like the V formation like geese?
To some degree, yeah.
In all seriousness, what I imagine of a school psychologist's job, there's a lot you have to negotiate, balance. How do you personally prepare to kind of reintegrate back into the school year?
That's a great question, especially probably this year's, well, the last couple of years have been pretty different compared to typical, school years for us. We have been having to be more thoughtful about the years coming, given that obviously COVID has been a huge piece of our planning over the last couple of years. I think this year we finally are looking to coming back to what we hopefully will be somewhat of a typical year. At least the structure of school will be somewhat typical, but we are all being very mindful that our kids' experiences over the last years have been anything but typical. So we are still being really mindful of that our kids are still lacking what we would see as typical transitions and typical experiences. So we're being very mindful of that. I think a lot of school districts, definitely ours in particular, definitely focusing on social and emotional learning as a priority and really knowing that we got to give our kids some more time to grow in those areas and using those as target areas. So a lot of our summer work is focusing on what can we do to teach those skills, because those are teachable skills. And we want to remember that development does play a role in that. We want to give kids time to grow and develop, but we need to provide those opportunities for them. And so how can we best teach those skills? So how do we start school and be mindful of what are the expectations we're having for kids? How do we teach those expectations? But also how do we give space and time for that for the kids?
Yeah. Now, I can't stand the idea of us, I guess it's a reckoning with the idea that we have to continually talk about COVID and then continually talk about what that's kind of wrought on our kids, but then also looking at how COVID has potentially prepared us for whatever comes next. You have this balance that is making sure the social and emotional learning of children is front and foremost. And the second then is, all right, we are trying to balance that against what feels like new conditions that might return us to a different situation.
I think we've always talked about, I've been a school psychologist for over 30 years, and we have been banging a gong for years and years saying that social emotional development is the most important thing. And if you look across the world, a lot of other countries have always said the most important thing for children is their social emotional development. And I think in the US, that has often taken the backseat to academic performance. We care about academic performance, and we should. We're schools, right? We should care about that. But I think what COVID did was say, hey, listen, this is really important. And we saw the fallout from it. And a lot of districts did okay academically. Our district did well as far as like being able to provide academics and saw academic growth with our kiddos. But I think what this is teaching us is that we can't just be looking at the next thing that happens and be preparing for it, because we're just always then just living in the moment versus preparing for life, right? And so when we focus on social emotional learning and we focus on teaching our kids the skills that we need, then we're teaching them those life skills that they need to deal with whatever comes their way, right? We talk about anxiety has gotten out of control. Well, anxiety is about what we tell ourselves. And when we have anxious adults, we have anxious children. You know, it's funny because at Oyster River, we have social emotional learning. We have a curriculum that's K-4. Well, now it'll be 5. And we're looking at it, doing stuff for K-12. And a lot of districts in the state are doing that. And one of the things one teacher said to me, oh, this social emotional learning is great. We're teaching all these skills. When are we going to talk to the kids about anxiety and depression? And I was like, well, if we're teaching these skills, we don't need to talk to them about anxiety and depression, because they'll have the skills that when they're feeling anxious or worried or sad, they'll know what to do. And so that's the focus of it. We're teaching kids skills so that when they have these uncomfortable feelings or when they have a situation that causes things to arise, they're going to know what to do. And then they'll have the support. And part of that is the social support. Part of that is the co-regulation you get with your folks when your parents are there to kind of help support you. But it's giving kids the toolbox that they need so that they can address what's happening.
I was just thinking toolbox. And in many ways, it feels like COVID, you hate to go for silver linings, but it's shifted how we've actually approached all this, where it says, okay, academics backseat. And maybe that's because conditions have allowed for kind of this next great step in, the evolutionary process of even the school district itself.
Absolutely. Because, if you're sitting in your class and you're very anxious about something, you're not available for learning, right? And we know that, that's part of my job is working with kiddos who have concerns, who have, whether it's a learning concern, whether it's a behavioral concern, emotional concern. If we're not available for learning, it doesn't matter how bright you are. It doesn't matter what's available if you can't access it. And so that's what we want. We want to make sure that kids are available for learning and able to access what's being put in front of them. So really, I think that's, there was a lot of silver linings to COVID in that we did a lot of things that we didn't think we were capable of doing. And there's a lot of things that were put, systems and things that got put in place that people are like, hey, you know what? Why are we changing it? Look at what, the restaurant industry, outdoor seating. Wow. We've kept it in place. So the same thing, like, let's take a look at what worked and really gave us made us think outside the box. But I really think it did put social emotional learning at the forefront of things that, we can do a lot more with this, and that it helps our kids to be more available for learning.
So glad you mentioned the newfound patio scene. Now, my next question is kind of self-serving, because I instantly think about, my son returning and what it brings to our family dynamic and how to help him. And so, I always want to say, well, what can I do? But it makes more sense to kind of back up and say, wait a minute, in that transitional time heading back to school, what are kind of the challenges that we would expect to see our kids going through? What are some of the opportunities?
Well, I think number one's important as adults to realize that we put our narrative on this, right? So we're worried about it. We're thinking about it. Most kids aren't. Most kids are living in the moment, right? So that's summertime for them until the day they get on the bus, pretty much. Especially the age group I deal with, which are elementary school kids. It's summer until you tell them tomorrow school starts, right? So I think it's really important for adults to be really mindful. It's their perspective, and they want to not project their anxiety, their worry, their wonders onto children. So I always like to have conversation with kids and see what they're thinking about versus kind of telling them what they're thinking about, or kind of putting the ideas in their head. But see kids where they're at, meet kids where they're at is super important. Like, have you thought about school? What are you thinking about school? Listen, and kids will tell you where they're at. Kids will tell you, they'll also ask questions. And when they have enough information, they're going to stop asking. So adults love information. Adults love to talk. Kids will tell you what they want to tell you and they're done, and they'll stop asking questions when they don't want to know. I think we tend to over talk sometimes or tell kids too much. So number one for me is make sure that you're not kind of overdoing it with kids, and then put the worry away. like, should I be worried about that? Wait, mom, are you worried about that? Should I be worried? Kids follow adults' leads, right? Kids look to the adults. So if you're worried about what's going up, kids are going to worry about it. Right. But if you're like, hey, I'm excited, school's going to be starting soon. What are you thinking about that? Enter into kind of like a partnership with them more so.
Do you feel like, and I'm thinking even very specifically, like when we talk about this, if you were to say, how do you feel about going back to school versus are you anxious about going back to school?
Correct. You already put the thought in their head that they should be anxious.
Okay. So even introducing the notion of anxiety with the question itself is something that we can work on.
Absolutely. So I would just ask, how do you feel about going back to school? When you're thinking about, what do you think about school? What are you thinking about first grade? Like put an open-ended so that it gives them the opportunity to say, not much, or, and then if they're saying not much, okay. So if you're concerned or you put out, you feeling happy, sad, you can give a bunch of choices. But when you put that, are you feeling anxious about school? The question is, well, should I be anxious? Maybe I should be anxious about school. What does it mean to be anxious? And for me, anxious brings up another worries about it. Are you worried? Are you sad? Are you wondering? Things like that. So it should always be a range of choices.
What I'm hearing is we need to talk about it, but not in a leading way. When we get those responses, though, what do we do with them?
That's okay. It's reassuring that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with being worried about going to school. That's typical. That's okay. So how can we make you feel more comfortable? What's some things we could do? Could we take a walk and go visit school? Things like that. So you want to make sure that what they're feeling, there's nothing wrong with it, that it's typical. And sometimes you don't have to do anything about it, because I think that's the other thing. We want to fix it. As parents, we want to fix it. We want everything to be happy. We want everything to be good. And there's nothing wrong with someone being sad. There's nothing wrong with our children feeling uncomfortable. In fact, it's great to have a range of emotions and know that when I feel uncomfortable and I lean into being uncomfortable and I lean into doing something hard and I'm able to do it, that's so reinforcing. It's also develops competence. It develops, skill. Being able to do hard things or things that are difficult or uncomfortable builds competence. And we want our kids to be more competent than we want them to be comfortable. That's really important.
Because that competence actually will lead them through uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And it builds resilience. That's where the resilience comes from, having those experiences of knowing that you can be uncomfortable and it's not a tragedy, knowing that you can be in a situation that is where you feel worried or you don't feel like you can do this and you do it. Then you feel you feel that you know that you can get through it, and that builds resilience. So the next time something happens, okay, I know this is uncomfortable, but I'll lean into it because last time I did this, I was able to do it.
I suppose this whole line of questioning comes down to this word I can't stand, which is what's normal, right? What's normal, a kind of range of behavior or expectations for the child. And I guess, I resist it so much because it's just such a box to put it in, but it is like foundationally at the center of, I think, my head, my wife's head, because we're trying to assess when does intervention in some capacity come in. So how do we then, as caregivers and parents, distinguish what is the range of behavior that's considered normal? When do you essentially need to step in to address it?
So help with normal, say typical, gives a range, So I think it's really important that there's a range. And the way that I look at it is that, especially working in an elementary school, probably the elementary school, especially like those kindergarten, first grade years are where you see the biggest range of what typical looks like because it's a pretty variable range. And then it starts to kind of solidify. And then probably you see it again in middle school when you walk through a middle school hallway and you see like, especially 7th and 8th grade where the girls are like 5 feet and the boys are still only 4 feet. You see that big range of what typical is again. And then again, it kind of solidifies a little bit more, comes high school ages, so you see that ebb and flow of development for kiddos. And that's what's really important to keep in mind, that development is very specific to in an individual. And so we, and in school and teachers are trained and understand development. I walk into a classroom and it doesn't shock me to see different behaviors going on because there is a full range. And so we always are functioning from like that developmental perspective that we don't expect everybody to be doing the same thing. And I think that's kind of a misconception. I think there's a worry that if we have a concern that parents are concerned we're expecting kids to be fitting into this little box. And that's not really the case. We don't expect everyone to be sitting in their chairs just a certain way, doing a certain thing. And usually kids are not, a concern's not brought up after something happens once either. So it's usually about patterns of behavior. So if you're thinking about what is typical, if you see something happen once, twice, 3 times, still, you're looking for patterns. So really if there's a concern concern that you're seeing at home. There's quite often we're seeing behaviors at school that parents don't see at home. Well, totally different settings, different sets of expectations. So sometimes parents reach out to us. They're seeing stuff at home. We're not seeing it here at school at all. Again, different settings, different expectations. I think the biggest thing is if you have a concern to reach out to school, and we're happy to have those conversations. But knowing that at school, if we see a concern, that is done in a way that it's because we're caring and we want to try some interventions. And so, and the range of interventions is huge too. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. I think that's the biggest issue. I
agree.
It doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It's just that we'd like to try something to support the child. It's not that we want to fix them. It's not that, that we're trying to mold them into something or to fit them into that little tight box. It's that we want to prevent struggling. The conversations I have with parents is, as adults, we bring our perceptions from our experience, our personal experiences. And if you didn't have a good experience in school, and we all come from an era school was different when we came through. There was a lot of things and systems in place that didn't do things well. And school has changed a lot. And I definitely in the Northeast, school systems have changed tremendously. And prevention, early intervention has really become the focus of things. We have systems in place now called multi-tiered systems of support, where you don't have to wait to fail. The wait to fail system is done and gone. And where it's like the minute we see warning signs, we see things, we are constantly, all those quick little assessments we do to track and to keep on things that we've been able to pinpoint when we can see where things might start to be a problem for kiddos. And we intervene sooner, less need for kids to need special education, less reason for kids to need more higher levels of intervention if we intervene earlier. I mean, look at, early interventions since birth. Like, look at what medical interventions have done. Schools have caught on to, we're doing the same thing here. So not to be worried that when those comments are made or concerns are brought up, the idea is that we're doing this to prevent the need for later help, right? So that the sooner we intervene, the less need for help. And I think, but it's hard for parents, and I totally get it. I myself have, been at the other end of the table where there's been concerns raised, for some learning concerns for my kids. And being in this business, it wasn't any easier sitting on the other, knowing the whole system. But I get it, because you immediately go to, oh my God, I'm a parent. I failed. What didn't I do well? I'm in the business. I should have known. But I do feel that it's normal, but it's not an attack on your parenting. It's not an attack on knowing that, but we're about doing what's best for kids. That's really what we want. And I know it's hard to know that and to feel that as a parent. But really, it's, we really try to do what's in the best interest of kids and what we want to work. And I know people can think that sounds Pollyanna, because not all systems may work that way. But really, if there can be kind of a good faith that everybody's doing things for in the best interest of kids.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to have more from Felicia Sperry, school psychologist at Oyster River School District. Don't go anywhere.
Join New Hampshire Children's Trust September 22nd for the 10th Annual Strengthening Families Summit, The Power of Stories. Grounded in the Strengthening Families framework, this year's summit will examine how storytelling can empower, heal, expand perspectives, and influence decision makers to invest in New Hampshire families and build strong communities. Registration for this event closes Friday, September 16th, so get your tickets today. To learn more, visit nhchildrenstrust.org. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. And now back to the show. Well, it's interesting because it made me think about, our early interactions. And one of the reasons I'm here is because obviously my son is in this school district and we have had these conversations. And I, was going to ask, which you've already answered, but there's immediately a defensiveness that came out of me because I don't know if it was that different era. I graduated, I think, 98. So it was a while ago, but immediately was on my heels and trying to figure out, okay, how in my head do I take what
what's being said and stand up for my child. And the response immediately was, well, I have to essentially debate what I'm hearing. But I think that there is a different way to stand up for your child, that's what I'm hearing now.
And you want to advocate for your child 100%, but advocate in a way that it doesn't have to be adversarial. And that's what we're in, because also that's what's happening from the other end. Like a teacher bringing up concerns is advocating for your child to get help. We're public education. We're not advocating. We're not asking to get rid of your kid. We're not asking to that's it's kind of like we're arguing for the same thing. We want exactly. Support. And we're not asking for, I remember you asking well, how can we fix what's happening in schools? Like you can't, you're not here, but you asked, how can we support them at home? Well, yeah. And we've talked about things you could do at home, but also home's a different, we can't fix what's going on at home just as much as you can't fix what's going on at school. But there's things you can do to support learning at home, and there's things you can do to support behavior at home just as much as there's things we could do. So two different environments, different expectations, but there can be a common language used. Yeah. There can be some common expectations across. But the key thing is when we work as a team to support a child, then they feel supported in both places. And that's the key piece. And then when the child knows that there's a team working with them, that the people at school care about them just as much as the people at home care about them, and that they're not getting away with anything in either place. It's helpful, and that kids want to know what the boundaries are. Kids thrive in structure. And I think that often is misunderstood. People think structure is rigidity, and it's not. Nobody does well in a rigid environment, but kids want to know where the boundaries are, and kids are going to push and bang until they find where those boundaries are. And so when we provide structure and comfortable boundaries where kids feel safe and secure and know that the grownups in their lives are going to take care of them, not do it for them, not enable them, not take away all the boundaries, all the barriers for them, because they need to be able to work things. They need to know that things are hard. Our job as parents and educators is not to make things easy for kids. And I know as a parent, you want to make your kid to be happy and not to endure any kind of struggle, but we need for it to be an authentic experience for our kids. They need to know what it means to work at something and to persist and be successful on the other side. Vygotsky is a great researcher, and he always talked about this, proximal level of support is like scaffolding. He came up with the idea of scaffolding, where you're just holding them just enough that they have to struggle a little bit, but get through to the other side. And that's that idea that we kind of scaffold, we support, but we don't take away. The child has to feel like they put the effort in to get to the other side, so they could feel it's theirs, that they own it, that they didn't do it, And so that's that idea of co-regulating for kids, giving them that support so they can get to the other side, but knowing that they have a team and they can support and they know where those boundaries are. And that's where they, but we can't do that if we're not all working together.
Right. It makes me think about that toolbox that we were talking about earlier. There's no point in having tools in a toolbox if you never touch them.
Exactly.
So a lot of times what I'm seeing with my sons is that they will do well under structure, or even the threat of structure, or, a babysitter or grandparents in the room. And then the moment I get home, there's this great release, which I am starting to realize is they have this emotional release because it is this safe environment.
Absolutely.
So how am I supporting that?
And that's a great question, because we get a lot of times, my kid comes home from school and they absolutely melt down. Right. So school's too stressful for them. And it's like, well, think about yourself at work. Do you ever come home from work and just lose it when you come home and go, oh my gosh, work was just absolutely ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's different expectations, right? So someone's ability to regulate themselves at work, someone's ability to regulate them at school, and they come home and they just let loose because they know they can do that. They can do it. I always tell parents that's a great thing, because it's a great thing that they can do that at school. And so now at home, now you work. This is the co-regulation piece. How do you help them co-regulate now when they get home? Because you don't want them totally losing it every day when they come home, because it's a lot on parents. So that's where the home toolbox comes in handy. Like, how do we build the home toolbox? What works at home? Does it work to come home and jump on the trampoline for 10, 15 minutes before coming and talking to mom and dad? I think about my son who would come home every single day from school. How was school? Good. How was school? Good. Open up the book. Oh, this letter from the principal about how he got into trouble today. Today was good. But he would go out and ride his bike and do whatever. And then it would have to come in, and then we'd go for a car ride. That's when the conversation would come out about what happened. So there has to be some kind of system that works for the family, works for the child. So whether, I notice when you come home, you don't want to talk to mom and dad. I notice that, you're ravishingly hungry, that you need to do some kind of physical, or you need to get on and play some video games, or you need to watch a show that allows your brain to decompress. My job, I come home and my husband is really outgoing, will kind of be like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, don't even talk to me right now. I just need time to because I've been talking to people and kids and hearing all kinds of things. So if we think about what it's like for us for adults, we all do it too. We just don't have a tantrum on the floor, but our kids are doing. So giving those suggestions, what's your toolbox as an adult? And then kind of think of ideas that might work for your child, but have that conversation with your kiddos, and they're little. So you might have to make more suggestions. And the number one thing I'd suggest not to do is the send off to their room and just be by themselves. Cause then you're teaching them, when you're like this, I don't want to deal with you. So it might be they suggest I want to go to my room, but what are they doing when they go to the room? Are they listening to music? Are they putting headphones on and listening to some music, having some quiet, label that something versus just going to their room? You're going to take some time and listen to some music, or you're going to play some games, or you're going to cuddle with your stuffy on your bed for a little while. Give that a sense or, a name of something versus just being kind of pushed aside. Because we don't want kids having big feelings. I just want to be by myself, because that isolation or seclusion is not always a healthy way to be managing your big feelings. So you need some time to yourself. That's okay. What are you going to do with that time to yourself? So that the child's saying, I need to take a break. I'm going to take some time to myself versus I'm going to seclude myself kind of thing.
And, it's interesting because even with us trying to create all of those spaces and areas, there's parts in our caregiving, our expectation of his executive function and ability is clearly higher than, where he is in his development. And I think that is interesting because, we're talking about regulation as if self-regulation was something that they just have innately.
No.
And so I'm curious, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how does executive function in that development? And we're talking about now, I always use my family as an example because it's just what I'm going through. 6 going on 7.
So executive functioning takes place in your frontal lobe. And so we, come to find out that, your frontal lobe doesn't fully develop to about 25 years of age. Some people say a little bit later for some males.
42.
So, and it's interesting because a lot of the research, brain research is just exploding. Neuroscience, I think, has become the number one major across the country now. But the idea is that we can have relative expectations of some level of executive functioning at all ages. But it's interesting that if you were to ask what are the executive skill functions you expect at each age, you can't find it anywhere. They won't say that you expect this, because it is individual to some degree. Yeah. You can have a 7-year-old girl who can fill out a planner like there's no tomorrow and have everything totally organized. And then but you can have another 7-year-old girl who's sitting and has stuff all over the place in the organization. So Peg Dawson and Dick Ware are two folks in New Hampshire, psychologists who are very well known for their work with executive skills. They wrote Smart But Scattered and Coaching with Executive Skills. They have multiple publications and are clinicians who do work in this area. And I've worked with both of them. And, I always said, how come you guys never put out anything around, this is what to expect at this age and this age? And they said, because you never want to underestimate. If you do that, then automatically you're underestimating what people might be capable at each age. And I think there is some truth in that. But in school, we do have some general expectations of what kids, if you think about it in kindergarten, it's a lot of teaching of those skills too, and there's some truth. Everything you needed to know, you learned in kindergarten, kind of thing, But there is there's a reason why, school age is between, 5 and 6 years old. But the number one thing is being able to regulate. If you cannot regulate yourself, and we talk about 3 areas of regulation: behavioral, emotional, and cognitively, behaviorally being able to inhibit yourself. If you can't stop, if you don't have that impulse control, think of a 3-year-old, right? There is no impulse control in a 3-year-old. That's why we don't have 3-year-olds sitting in schools, right? They go to preschool, but this preschools, you're expecting them to walk around and move around and things. Being able to monitor, has some self-monitoring. So it has some idea that, when you walk into what's everybody doing? I should regulate myself, compared to everybody else. Emotional regulation, being able to have feelings and regulate them. If you're a big feeling and everything comes out, that's that, being able to manage those, whether it's anger or frustration or happiness too, as everything come all out, then you have more of those cognitive regulation, which we kind of more school-based things that we often we might see concerns at home, but maybe not at school. Getting started on the task, being able to initiate working memory, being able to hold information. Can you ask your child to do 3 things, go upstairs and get this, this, and this? They don't never come back down, or come down with 1, or go upstairs. They're playing Legos. They forgot totally what you had to say to them, right? Being able to organize and plan, monitor their tasks, those things. So those or those different areas to regulate. So what we know though is that like as kids are going through school, those skills are developing. Those middle school years, middle school is all about executive skills. That's where they're learning. You think about your middle school, a lot of teamwork, a lot of projects, a lot of rubrics. That's where those years are, because those, you need those skills to do all that work you're going to do in high school, right? And then comes college years, then you're on your own independently managing all of that work. And that's usually where things fall apart for a lot of right?
Well, and that has to do with what you're saying about frontal lobe 25.
Exactly.
You're on your own at 18, 19.
Exactly.
And you're still not able to have that triangle, which is funny because when you say those three, behavioral, emotional, cognitive, they lean on each other.
Correct.
And we've had this discussion early on about how one impacts the other, in that if, my son is falling behind because of a focus issue and he's smart enough to see his, that he is falling behind, there is an emotional response, which causes a behavioral outburst.
Yes.
And so the way those two things kind of lean into each other, I think is really interesting.
Big silver lining for me, for the world, was what it showed schools are. Schools are the executive functioning organizer for families and for kids. When we took schools out of the picture for COVID, the organization went away. So when you walk into, especially in elementary school, and you walk into an elementary school classroom, teachers organize. They take off the executive load off of kids. The classroom is organized. They know where their backpack goes. They know their schedule for the day. They know what's coming next. School is very organized and predictable for kids because they know those executive skills haven't been developed yet. So what a kindergarten classroom looks like is very different from what a high school classroom looks like, because it's meant to support those executive skills as they're developing. So a great executive skills focused classroom is one where there's not a whole ton of stuff on the walls, but the kids know where to find it. All the glue sticks are in one bin. All, the daily schedule is on the board. Everything because otherwise, if that stuff isn't where it has to be, you constantly have to think about that. You have to figure out where it all is. You have to wonder what time things are going. So that clogs up your brain, and then you're not available for learning. So then when you get by the time you're getting to fourth grade, there's more folders. There's more things to have. Okay, I want you to organize your desks now. You have more individual material. But school organizes things. They know when they're going to go to lunch. They know to get into a line. They know all those kind of things. So it takes the load off while those skills are developing, while that brain's developing.
This has been absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad you agreed to come on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't tell you how helpful this is for me personally, and I know for other folks out there. So thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. Today's show was also brought to you by the Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy and Protection Program, a multidisciplinary program with the Children's Hospital established to evaluate and provide integrative care to suspected victims of child maltreatment. Together, a team of physicians, advanced practice registered nurses, social workers, nurses, and child life specialists work to provide consultation and evaluations of children who are suspected victims of abuse, so to serve in the best interest of children and families at multiple levels of prevention. For more information about Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy Protection Program, visit www.chadkids.org/child-advocacy. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.